And once those starts run out, you can't start the car.
Okay.
You're stuck.
Okay, so that's a very common misconception. Whenever a channel that doesn't understand sprinters puts out a story about sprinter vans, I try my best to hold back and bite my tongue. However, when the misinformation is so egregious and it reaches so many people, I can't help but to give my 2 cents and clear the record on some things. So that's what we're going to do.
So at the dealer I was at, we were one of actually very few Sprinter dealers. We did everything when it came to Sprinters. We sold the Airstream RVs, we sold cargo, we sold passenger, we even took on Sprinter Metris, and we even had conversion vans of those from Explorer that had...
Okay, hold off right off the bat. Sprinter Metris isn't a thing. You have the Mercedes Metris and you have the Mercedes Sprinter. Saying you have a Sprinter Metris is like saying you have a Dodge Charger Challenger. They're different models and different vans entirely. So we're not off to a good start here.
The high top conversions and the big puffy seats, so everything Sprinter was its whole own division. Early on, I forget exactly what year it was, the Sprinters were pretty new to the Mercedes brand. They were sold early on as Dodge Freightliner, but I think it was around 2012 that Sprinter came to Mercedes.
Sprinter was imported pre-2010 as generally Dodge and Freightliner badges, and interesting enough, they've always been Mercedes vehicles. There were certain import reasons which made it make sense to import them under the Dodge brand, which pre-2010 they were mostly Dodge and Freightliner, and even to this day you'll see Sprinters, brand new ones, with the Freightliner badge. A little bit off, but we're gonna give them a pass on this one.
There was this big contract out there to get FedEx was looking for a bunch of new vans. I forget the quantity. Our dealership got a bunch of these vans. They ordered them for FedEx, and it went downhill from there. Sprinters are not exactly the most reliable vehicle out there. They have a lot of issues, oil leaks, different running issues, especially the 2012s and newer. Anything with AdBlue, BlueTech, DEF, all kinds of different names for it.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. Yes, he's absolutely right in that there were certain reliability issues between the 2010 and 2013 models especially, and the ones beyond that. He has his years mixed up. He refers to them as having oil leaks, which, of the problems that these vans do have, oil leaks is generally not one of them. The issues these vans do have with oil, I talk about in this video, which I'll try and link here or here. In general, it's not really a leak. It's really more an issue with the oil getting sort of sucked out of the engine. Saying they have oil leaks isn't really correct. In fact, even the oil cooler issue generally primarily causes the coolant leak as opposed to an oil leak. Yes, running issues. Oil leaks generally not quite, it's not quite accurate here.
But anything that has urea injection or after treatment for the exhaust emissions, which was mandated in 2012.
Yep, 2010. For the commercial vehicles, they brought it into the SUVs, I believe, a year earlier, if I'm not mistaken, around 08 to 09 for the Mercedes diesel SUVs. And he's absolutely right in that, regardless of whether it's a Mercedes or even the Ford Power Strokes, which essentially use a lot of very similar engine components built by the same company, there were very big issues the first generation, the first 3 years or so this was introduced.
They almost guaranteed are going to break in short order. People put the wrong stuff in them. They don't put enough. They don't put high quality DEF fluid. Would actually cause a lot of issues as well. And when this happens...
Now, the quality of the urea AdBlue system, I don't quite buy into that. There's definitely a concern of, putting coolant in instead of the actual ammonia mixture. But, the quality issue, it's questionable. But okay.
I believe it was a government mandate, but the engine essentially shuts down.
Oh,
So if you have a fault while you're driving, you get limited power and you get
okay. Before I respond to some of this stuff, he's actively talking about the newer urea injection, and they're showing this isn't necessarily Cameron's fault here, but they're showing an older 2006 or before Sprinter, which of course, didn't have urea injection. So, the 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 level of knowledge of not necessarily Cameron, but whoever put this video together and created their clickbaity title of "Here's Why Sprinter vans are the worst." There's definitely a learning curve there.
the wonderful engine starts remaining message, which is very nerve-wracking if you're not close to home. So it'll
Absolutely
say
right.
you have 5 starts remaining. And once those starts run out, you can't start the car.
Okay.
You're stuck.
Okay, so that's a very common misconception. So that's one. It's 100% false. When the starts go down to 0, you can still start the car. It'll just say starts remaining idle or something along those lines. The real issue comes in is the speed at which the car will let you drive. And that's generally it's known as derate mode, and he talks about this low power mode and whatnot. That's completely separate in this situation. There's no real no power mode when it comes to this issue. It's an emissions related issue. So yes, you can start the car. Yes, you can drive it. It will limit your speed to 5 miles an hour, and it is as annoying as you can imagine. But you're not going to be stuck somewhere per se. You can still drive it home. In fact, I have driven one of these home at 5 miles an hour for about an hour, and it is you have no idea how slow 5 miles an hour is until you drive at that speed. Just for reference, most people could probably walk/jog at a pace faster than 5 miles an hour. You're talking like 12-minute miles there. Yes, it's annoying as hell, but no, it does not prevent you from starting your engine. So unfortunately, he's a little bit misled in this area.
And the only way to fix this is to clear the fault codes. So you usually have to have a dealer level tool to clear these fault codes. And then you get one more start until the fault code's set again.
Okay, so there's a lot. This is kind of a mixed bag here. Yes, you can say it's clearing the fault codes. This particular system isn't quite that simple. It's what's known as, I believe, ECN coding, which, yes, he's correct. You need that very expensive tool, whether it's dealership level or something with an online access, to be able to think of it as like a module reset, not quite as clearing the codes per se, but he's not wrong in that. At the end of the day, the codes do clear. So given he's a service advisor, he's going to get a pass on this one. But let's go on here.
These FedEx Sprinters just came in by the droves. They're all broken. They're not easy to fix, and it ended up just being a total disaster for FedEx. Now you don't see any more FedEx Sprinters out on the road.
There's still brand new FedEx Sprinters out on the road. There's different levels. You can have independent contractor FedEx. I believe it's FedEx Ground, where the person sort of buys his own FedEx vehicle and badges it and does his own delivery. There's different levels. But yeah, he's right in that the use of Sprinters for FedEx has gone way down, but it's not zero, right? You still see Sprinter FedEx vehicles around all the time. Not terrible, but it's a little bit uninformed.
Memorable ones is we had an issue with I believe it was some other kind of running issue. It was running hot or something like that. So not the normal failure. It would actually start and run and work, but it had a bunch of other weird issues going on. This is a perspective to even modern or large, shipping companies that have drivers of all kind of different quality that, when a car is not yours, the level of care tends to drop significantly. So this
Okay, he is spot on here. If you've ever worked with what's called fleet vehicles, the drivers will drive them like they stole them, and he's absolutely right. They'll just, if you're not responsible for the maintenance, you're going to drive it like it's not yours. When it comes to fleet vehicles, if they don't own it, they're not going to take care of it the same way as individuals who own it would.
This one came in, and tech starts looking at it. Like all sprinters, they're a pain in the butt to deal with. And a couple days go by, and finally, the technician comes up to me with a little jar. It's got this pink fluid in it, and I'm like, "What is this?" He says, "Just smell it." So he sticks it up. I mean, not even close to my nose, just like maybe about here, about a foot away or so. And I about fell over. The smell coming out of whatever this was, just acidic, thick, rancid, like it burned the hairs out of your nose. And I'm like, "Good Lord, buddy, what is this?" And he said, "It's coolant." And I'm like, "No, that's not coolant. That's not what that smells like." He said, "But it has exhaust fluid put in it." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Yes." He said, "Someone got a low DEF message and decided it needed to go into the cooling system instead of the bright blue cap that says DEF on it. Doesn't need to go there. It needs to go in the coolant reservoir has pink coolant in it."
This is, well done on the technician for checking this out. This hasn't been something I've had to deal with, but I imagine the ammonia mixture, it's you'd expect it to smell like very old pee. It's definitely going to smell rancid. If you put that DEF fluid in the coolant system, there may even be chances that it evaporates at some point in the system. So yeah, this can totally cause all kinds of issues. It's just a great story.
So this one, I forget, I think it was $8,000 or so. Whole cooling system had to be rebuilt because it actually turned like gummy in some areas. And so, I mean, every line, water pump, had to flush the block, a heater core, radiator, everything had to be done. One of our most interesting.
Yeah, so replacing the cooling system is expensive. Now, when it comes to the dealership, if they're going to warranty something, they're going to replace everything they need to in order to ensure that beyond a shadow of a doubt that the problem won't come back. So, you'll see this in the fuel system. This isn't always the right way to do it, especially if you own your own vehicle, and I mean, in this particular scenario, the person probably could have gotten away with a full radiator flush at home, and they probably would have been fine, especially if they did a full flush a couple times over the course of a month or two. But if you're at the dealer and if in order to cover their side of things, they're going to replace everything. And that you see this in a lot of places, and it's not necessarily the wrong way to do it, but a lot of times it is overkill. So yeah, $8,000 for a little mistake. That's not a cheap bill.
Interesting client. His name was Mihai. And if you see any of the people that work closely with me at the dealer at the time, they will know when they hear, "I am Mihai." He was this gentleman of Eastern European descent that drove a Sprinter. He was a what we call a hotshot driver. He'd pick up random deliveries and take them to where they needed to go in his Sprinter. He had the full setup. Like, he lived in this Sprinter. He made his own wooden cot. So he built the frame, had it all set up. I believe he even got some kind of restroom situation installed in there. So he took a bare Sprinter cargo van and turned it into a essentially sleeper cab, 18-wheeler cab of sorts. He was an eccentric individual, as most truck drivers are. And he came in, brought in the Sprinter, and he had issues with it running. He said, "It shuts off, doesn't run right, it skips. I need to make money with this thing." As with all Sprinters that come in, just about, they are money-making machines for their owners. So they are the ones that push you the hardest to get their cars fixed. And
So for him in this scenario as a service advisor, now he's absolutely right, and this is probably one of the biggest issues when it comes to repairability of these vans. When the diagnostic process isn't as clear cut as it could be, or if you have technicians who are maybe a little newer to this. It sounds like when he was working at this Mercedes dealership, it was when this new system was introduced. So I imagine it was quite the nightmare. You want some level of predictability. You want to tell a customer, hey, look, parts will be here tomorrow. We're going to replace this and it'll be ready in 3 days, something like that. And when it comes to these sprinters, and especially the newer exhaust system, there just wasn't that same level of predictability when it came to fixing them, at least not at the start.
unfortunately, for the technician side, sprinters are not easy to deal with. They do not have good diagnostic information. The even the when you scan them and look at stuff on the computer, the fault codes are kind of inconclusive, and you have to do a lot more digging than just plugging it in, seeing what's wrong with it. But we had this with one.
Okay, I'm going to push back on this a little bit. So, there's it's kind of a mixed bag. Yes, fault codes can be inconclusive, but when it comes to the level of information these vehicles give you, it's unmatched. There's rarely a vehicle brand out there that has this many sensors on it and has this much feedback from those sensors. Maybe the exception is BMW here, but when it comes to like they don't give you as much information, that is 100% false. Now, when it comes to interpreting it, yeah, that can have huge problems, which I'm sure a lot of technicians really struggled with, especially earlier on. This is 10 plus years ago, so yeah, not quite correct there.
One of our longtime Sprinter technicians, and I think it's like weeks go on, and we can't quite figure out what's wrong with this Sprinter. He looks at all these different sensors and just can't figure out what's wrong with it. Finally, I don't know what caused this, but he decided to take a fuel sample. So we do that, and it is probably about 30-40% gasoline. And with any modern diesel, most diesels in general, but especially modern diesels, gasoline does not work well in a modern diesel. Usually this ends up in probably $15,000-$20,000 in repairs. Your high pressure pump, your injectors, everything has to be replaced because diesel fuel is oil based, as is gasoline, but it's refined differently. But diesel fuel lubricates, gasoline does not.
Contaminated fuel. This is going to be a little bit of a hot topic, but it comes down to the fact that let's say, for one, he is absolutely right. Diesel has certain lubricating properties which gas simply does not have. Now, on the flip side of that, that doesn't mean that, when you put a bit of gas in your tank, if you put a gallon of gas in your tank accidentally, everything goes haywire. No, chances are it'll be fine. 2, 3, maybe 4 gallons, still probably be fine. Now, if you take gas and diesel, mix them together, they do mix. They're not just going to be separate. It's not just going to be 100% gas and 100% diesel, as might be the case if you put oil over water or something. They will mix together and form their own special concoction. So yeah, he's correct in that it's very possible his fuel system could have needed repair, but this goes back to the fact that if they're going to warrant something, they're going to go the whole 9 yards, which in this case is every single system that handles fuel in the vehicle, which can be extremely expensive. I purchased a vehicle which had contaminated fuel. Sure enough, I flushed the whole system. I pulled the injectors and gave them a full cleaning, and that thing ran like a top after. So it's not always the case that you put some gas in your vehicle and things go absolutely haywire. It can happen. It shouldn't be the default assumption.
So when you get gasoline in one of these engines, you lose all your lubrication and you end up with metal throughout the entire fuel system.
It can
This
happen.
vehicle was actually under warranty. So I had to go back to this customer and say, hey, I'm sorry, there's gasoline in the fuel. This isn't a warrantable condition. How would you like to proceed? Mihai proceeds to berate me just about. He, as with many clients, that you approach them with something they.
All right, you can tell right off the bat, this guy is a very experienced service advisor, and he's used to having these conversations with people where, they've done something wrong and he kind of has to let them know they did something wrong, which sounds exactly like what's happening in this scenario. And this is a great example of what can happen at these dealerships and how and why service managers and advisors really do need to have such thick skin, because um, they can go above and beyond and do everything correctly, but still the customer isn't happy. And I think we're going to see this here.
Probably know, but don't want to hear that they've been caught in their mistake, lie, whatever you want to call it. Starts going off. There's no way there's gas in my tank. I only put diesel. There's no way this could happen. And I'm like, sir, I understand that. You know, it's possible, just as we see water get in fuel at fuel gate stations. It's maybe you got contaminated fuel. He didn't want to hear it. There's no way, you need to fix it. I'm not leaving until you fix it. And I'm like, well, that's not how this is going to work. I have to bring this up to the shop foreman, the service manager. He wants to speak to the manager as well. So I grab my service manager at the time. I'm like, hey, this is what's going on. You never want to drag them in blind. So you want to catch them to the side and tell them what's going on up front so they're prepared of what's about to happen. So I give him the rundown. This is what's going on. Customer's irate. Let's bring him in. So he comes in and
Okay, so you know how I said if you're a service advisor, you need to have very thick skin? Well, if you're a service manager, your skin needs to be at least 2 times thicker. Now, when you are interacting with these people, wherever it is, wherever you're getting your card in, you do not want to get on their bad side, simply because they've dealt with hundreds of customers. And unlike Cameron here, the service managers can be vindictive individuals who will leave your car sitting in the back lot for weeks on end and tell you all kinds of stories on why they can't get to it. Just a good reminder that wherever you are, treat people like human beings.
I don't think the service manager got more than a couple words in. This guy was just, I didn't put gas in my tank. This is, you need to fix this, and on and on and on. We actually have a nickname to this day. The service manager's name was Craig, but his name is Mr. Greg. So he would get up in his face and call him Mr. Greg. This is what you have to do. That just doesn't work. If you want help with something, you need to approach it nicely and respectfully. Because what's going to happen when you approach someone
100% correct.
angry or upset? Their wall goes up. They're immediately in the defensive. Anyway, we like to err on the side of the customer. We want to help them out. So I'm like, hey, let's start an insurance claim. This is a comprehensive claim. Something happened to the vehicle that's out of your control. We can do that. He wasn't keen on the idea. I think we went back and forth a couple weeks. We start an insurance claim. We get the adjuster out. He sees what's going on. It goes on the case of contaminated fuel. It can happen. We don't know what really happened, but we just want it fixed and to move on. Adjuster goes through. I think they approve close to $20,000 or $25,000 worth of work. Put a new fuel tank, fuel pump, high pressure pump, injectors, all the lines. You don't want to leave anything to chance. Mihai comes back. He doesn't want it. He decides that he doesn't want any out of pocket. He doesn't want it to go on his insurance. We're like, well, sir, we've gone through weeks of this. Like, we've already gone this far. How are we going to stop here? And the straw that broke the camel's back was the insurance adjuster said, we'll cover all this. However, we need to make sure these parts don't get used again. And so they said, we need to drill holes in the tank. That set Mihai off. I don't know why to this day, but he says he wants to keep his fuel tank and don't put any holes in his tank. He's going to keep it. We're like, sir, we can't. This is like, do you want this fixed or not? And he actually decided, he said, you will not put holes in my tank, and I'm going to take my car. That was 8 years ago. He took it.
All right, this is just another great example of a service manager and a dealership, to be honest. They're going above and beyond to help this guy out. And still the customer's convinced that, you know, that whatever happened wasn't their fault. And, this is a great example of how you can do everything right and still the customer is unhappy.
I don't know what happened to it, but we were this close to having it fixed with, I think, maybe a $500 deductible out of his pocket. I think we even offered to cover that for him just to help smooth over the whole situation. And he wouldn't do it. It sat at the lot for a few weeks. He picked it up, and that was the last we heard of I Am Mihai. Even with these issues, sprinters were a love-hate relationship. More of a hate relationship with us in service, but the sales guys love these things. You don't get the big 5 pounders or anything like that, as we say in the sales world. You don't get big margins on these. When you're getting these big contracts, you get what we call a flat, which is just a flat commission, maybe $200-300. But when you get these big contracts and you're selling and delivering 50, 75, 100, you've got hundreds more on order. You're reeling it in pretty well. Didn't matter if as long as the paperwork was signed. So it may be signed paperwork come to service, but the deal was done. That's usually how the sales narrative went: is paperwork is signed, what we call a tail light warranty. As soon as you can't see the tail lights, you're home free. But the sales guys are thrilled. I've even between FedEx and more.
There's no question that these are easier vans to sell. The driver experience on these vans is by far the best. It doesn't compare to the Fords or the Econolines or even the ProMasters of the world. They're far better in every way. There's no doubt the reason people buy these might have one to do with the Mercedes badge, which is probably the worst reason you should get them, and two is that they drive really good. Like, they are comfortable to drive for long distances. If you're a hotshot driver, you're probably going to prefer one of these if you're driving 15-hour days.